I wasn't sure what to expect when I pulled up to the asylum that first night. It loomed in front of me, a colossal shadow against the night sky, its jagged edges illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. The air was still, unnaturally quiet, as if the world itself held its breath. The building was old, centuries old, from what I'd read. Its history was littered with whispers of dark experiments, sudden closures, and staff who never returned home. As I stood there, fumbling for my keys, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from one of the broken windows above. The empty panes seemed alive, like black eyes staring into my soul. The front door creaked open with a reluctant groan. The smell hit me first, a pungent mixture of mildew, rust, and something sweet yet rancid, like decaying flowers. It was the kind of scent that clawed its way into your throat, making it hard to breathe. The reception area was nothing like I'd imagined. Instead of a dusty, abandoned front desk, the room was startlingly clean, too clean. The floors gleamed under the dim fluorescent lights, and the furniture was arranged as though someone had just left moments ago. A single chair sat in the middle of the room, turned slightly toward me, its shadow stretching unnaturally long across the floor. I shook off the unease and told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But then I heard it, the faintest sound, like a whisper carried on a breeze that didn't exist. It wasn't clear at first, just a low hum, rising and falling, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. I followed the sound down the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the polished tiles. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, but I still couldn't make out the words. Was it a person? A radio left on somewhere? In case you're wondering, I said aloud, mostly to calm my own nerves, this is the part where any sane person would turn around and leave. But I didn't. Curiosity, or maybe stubbornness, kept me moving forward. At the end of the hallway, I stopped in front of a door marked 101. The numbers were faint, nearly worn away, as if someone had tried to scrub them out. I reached for the doorknob, but before my hand could touch it, a cold draft swept past me, chilling me to the bone. That's when I saw it. Faint handprints smeared across the glass window of the door. They weren't fresh, more like the greasy residue you'd find on a bathroom mirror after a hot shower, but they were definitely there. I stood frozen in front of the door to room 101, my breath shallow, my hand hovering inches from the tarnished doorknob. The greasy handprints on the glass stared back at me, mocking my courage, or perhaps daring me to proceed. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to leave the asylum and never look back. But something deeper, curiosity, stubbornness, anchored my feet to the ground. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was bathed in shadows, the only light spilling in from the hallway behind me. Dust particles danced lazily in the air, illuminated in the thin beam of my flashlight. The walls were lined with rusted lockers, each one dented and marred with scratches. It smelled faintly of copper and something else, something metallic yet sour. The sound of the whispering was louder now. It wasn't coming from this room. It was behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my flashlight. But the hallway was empty, silent, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out every rational thought. In case you're wondering, I muttered, my voice shaky, this is the part where people in movies run straight into danger like idiots. But I wasn't about to turn back now. Not without answer, as I followed the sound down another hallway, my shoes squeaking against the floor. The farther I walked, the dimmer the lights became, until they were nothing but flickering orbs struggling against the encroaching darkness. My flashlight was my only reliable guide, but even its beam felt muted, as if the shadows were swallowing it whole. Eventually, I reached a staircase. The whispers seemed to drift from below, deep, resonant, almost melodic now. Each step downward echoed in the silence, the sound bouncing off the walls in a way that made it feel like someone or something was following me. I stopped halfway down, straining to hear. And that's when I realized it wasn't just whispers anymore. It was laughter. Soft, childlike giggles that seemed to come from all around me. The staircase ended in a heavy metal door, its surface riddled with deep grooves that looked like claw marks. A broken sign hung crookedly above it, the words faded and unreadable. My flashlight flickered briefly as I reached for the handle, and in that split second of darkness, I felt it. A hand. Cold and clammy, it brushed against my wrist. I yelped and stumbled back, shining my light wildly around me. But the staircase was empty, shaking. I yanked the door open and stepped into the basement. It was cavernous, the ceiling stretching so high that my flashlight couldn't reach it. Pipes snaked along the walls, dripping water that pooled on the cracked concrete floor. The laughter was louder now, echoing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to tell where it was coming from. And then I saw it. A figure. Small and hunched, it stood in the far corner of the room, its back to me. The laughter stopped the moment my light landed on it, replaced by a deafening silence. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "Hey," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, my shoes splashing in the puddles. "Are you okay?" Still no response. But then, just as I was about to reach out, it turned. Its face, if you could call it that, wasn't human. Hollow sockets where eyes should have been, a jagged slit of a mouth stretched impossibly wide. It opened that mouth and let out a shriek so loud, so piercing, that I dropped my flashlight and clamped my hands over my ears. I stumbled backward, my heart racing in my chest. The creature's screech reverberated through my skull, a sound so unnatural that it felt like it was clawing at my very sanity. I had no idea what it was, but I knew in that instant that it was not of this world. The thing in the corner didn't move again. Its mouth remained gaping wide, dripping with some dark substance, and its skeletal hands' long fingers tipped with jagged nails twitched like they were preparing to lash out. My body was frozen. Every instinct I had told me to run, to leave this place and never look back. But my legs wouldn't move. My breath caught in my throat, and it felt like my lungs were being squeezed by an invisible force. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the thing. And then, it spoke. Not in words, at least not words I understood, but in a language that made my skin crawl. The sound was like the rustling of dry leaves mixed with something guttural, something ancient. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. My legs were still planted, my feet unwilling to obey. The creature tilted its head, as if studying me, its empty socket staring into mine. I reached for my flashlight, which had fallen to the ground, but the moment my hand touched it, the flashlight flickered once again. And that's when I saw them. The shadows. They moved. Not like any shadows I'd ever seen before. These weren't static. They seemed to shift, writhing and crawling along the walls, creeping closer and closer to me. As they drew near, I felt a coldness settle in my bones. A feeling of impending doom, like I was on the brink of being swallowed whole by the darkness. At that moment, the whispers returned. But this time, they were clearer, more coherent. They weren't just voices anymore. They were words. Soft and cold, as if the shadows themselves were speaking directly to me. "Leave now or you'll never leave." The voice was like a distant echo, coming from every corner of the room at once. It wasn't the creature that spoke, it was the very darkness itself, something much older than any living being. I knew I had to leave, but my legs felt like lead, too heavy to move. The laughter from earlier had stopped, replaced by the deep rhythmic pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. The room was suffocating, the walls pressing in on me, and I could feel the temperature dropping. "Why are you here?" The voice was louder this time, unmistakable. It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a command, and I could feel its power in my chest. I could hear myself breathing now, ragged gasps, each one more desperate than the last. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and my clothes clung to me like they were soaked in ice. I had to answer. I had to say something. But what could I say to the shadows? To the thing in the corner? I need to know what's going on here, I finally choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. A silence followed. Then, as if a decision had been made, the shadows shifted again, pulling back ever so slightly. The creature in the corner stirred, its eye socket still void, but its head raised slightly, as though it was considering my words. The room seemed to grow colder still, and the air thickened around me, choking me with its oppressive weight. And that's when I saw it. The walls, once bare, were now covered in markings, deep, slashing lines that formed words. Words in the same language the creature had spoken, words I couldn't understand. But the words were alive, they moved, shifting across the walls, as if the walls themselves were part of some larger, horrific design. The markings twisted and bent, as if trying to reach out for me, to pull me into the dark, to pull me into whatever twisted fate awaited me here. I reached out instinctively, my fingers grazing one of the words as it scrawled across the wall, and that's when the pain hit. A sharp electric pain shot through my fingertips and up my arm. It felt like my very bones were being shattered, like something inside of me was being ripped apart. I screamed, but no sound escaped my mouth. The shadows closed in tighter now, and the laughter started again, this time louder, more frantic. The creature's gaping mouth opened wider, and in that instant, I saw something horrifying. Inside the creature's mouth there was something else. I couldn't make it out at first, it was just a blur, like a second set of teeth, a second set of eyes, peering out from deep within. Then it became clear. The thing wasn't alone. It was only a vessel, and something far worse lay hidden within. The darkness in the room seemed to pulse, like it was alive, like it was breathing with me. Every heartbeat felt like it was drawing me deeper into its grasp. My fingers trembled, and I could feel my legs buckling, but I refused to fall. I refused to give in. I don't want to die here, I whispered to myself. But it wasn't enough. The shadows lunged. The hallway felt colder now, even though the temperature hadn't dropped. It was almost as if the building itself had grown hostile toward me. The walls seemed to close in tighter with each step I took, pressing against my chest like a suffocating weight. I had no idea what was happening anymore. The logic of it all, the reason I was there, felt completely irrelevant in this moment. I could hear my own breath shallow and quick echoing off the walls around me. I walked forward, trying to convince myself that I had control, that I was going to be fine. But the whispering voices, they had never stopped. They just grew louder. I kept moving. Each step felt like I was being dragged deeper into something I couldn't comprehend. The hallway stretched endlessly in front of me, no turns, no exits. Just an oppressive line of doors on either side, some cracked open, others firmly shut. I couldn't tell what was behind them, but I didn't want to find out. Not now. Not like this. The floor creaked beneath me as I walked, each step too loud, too obvious in the silence. I reached the door at the end of the hall. It was the only one I hadn't yet opened. My hand hovered over the handle, my fingers trembling despite myself. Something inside urged me not to open it, to turn back. But the pull, the hunger for answers, was too strong. I turned the knob slowly. It clicked. The door swung open to reveal nothing. At least, that's what I thought at first. There was no room, no furniture. Just an overwhelming black void that seemed to stretch on for miles. I couldn't make out any details, just a suffocating darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. I leaned closer, squinting. That's when I saw it just barely, at the edges of the room. A figure, standing still in the far corner. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark silhouette. But it was enough to send a cold shiver down my spine. I stepped back, closing the door as gently as I could. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what I had just seen, but I knew I couldn't face it, not like this. I turned around to leave. But the hallway had changed. The walls were now covered in cracks, long jagged lines snaking across the floor, ceiling, and every inch of space in between. It was as if the building itself was coming apart, unraveling piece by piece. The hissing sound had returned, louder this time. And now, there was something else, a deep guttural growl coming from somewhere below. I couldn't tell if it was a voice or something else entirely. I rushed back toward the stairs, my footsteps quicker now, my breath short and erratic. I couldn't leave fast enough. The growl followed me, echoing down the hallway. It was getting closer. Whatever it was coming for me. As I reached the staircase, I heard something shift behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the blackened hallway stretching behind me, empty. But I felt it. Something was there, lurking, just out of sight. I took the stairs two at a time, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I reached the first floor, almost tripping in my haste. The hallway was empty, eerily silent, but I didn't trust it. Not for a second. I could feel the eyes of the building on me. Watching. Waiting. I made my way to the door, my hand gripping the handle. But before I could turn it, a voice, faint, almost a whisper, sounded behind me. Leave. Before it's too late. The voice wasn't clear enough to identify, but I knew it had come from the direction of the stairs. I could hear the sound of something moving there, heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around. I couldn't afford to. I twisted the handle with all the strength I had left, throwing the door open. It swung wide, revealing the outside world, the cool air biting at my face. But as I stepped out into the night, I knew I wasn't alone. The presence, whatever it was still with me. It wasn't just the building anymore. Something had followed me. I ran. My feet slapped against the pavement as I sprinted away from the building, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't care where I was going. I just had to get away from there. From the dark, from the voices, from the thing that had been stalking me in that place. But as I turned the corner, I saw it. A figure. Standing at the edge of the street. Watching me. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. It was the same dark silhouette I'd seen in that room, the one that had been standing in the corner, waiting. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch as the figure took a step forward. Then another. And another. Don't run, it whispered. And I couldn't. Not anymore. The night had stretched on, and now, as the final moments of my shift approached, I felt the full weight of the building's dark presence pressing on me. Every creak, every shift of air in the room made me more aware of the eyes I could not see but felt. The walls, the ceiling, even the shadows seemed alive, as if waiting for something or someone. I glanced at the monitor again, more to reassure myself than to search for any signs of trouble. Yet, the moment my eyes landed on the screen, the flickering began again. The images on the cameras were distorted, and for a brief moment, I saw something I couldn't quite place, an odd, shadowy figure in the corner of the screen, lingering just out of focus. Was it real? I shook my head. It didn't make sense, but my heart was racing. It was as if everything in the building had conspired to make me doubt my own perception. The clock ticked closer to the hour. I didn't dare take my eyes off the monitors. The eerie, unsettling feeling that had plagued me all night hadn't let up, and I was no longer sure if I was waiting to leave or waiting for something else to happen. The distant hum of the building's HVAC system became deafening. I could hear it even over the whir of the monitors, now that the silence of the night had fully set in. I suddenly remembered Larry's warning, the one he had casually slipped in during our last conversation. Leave on time. Don't linger. Don't look back. For a moment, I entertained the thought of following his advice to the letter, packing up quickly, and running out the door without so much as a glance at the hall. But that was easier said than done, wasn't it? Something held me there, as if the building itself were unwilling to let me go. As I continued to stare at the screens, one camera feed caught my attention. It was the hallway camera, the very same hallway that had unsettled me earlier in the night. The camera was shaking, as though someone or something was moving too quickly in the frame. My breath hitched, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let fear take over. It's just the wind, I told myself. Or maybe it's a glitch. But then the door, the one that led to the stairwell, the very exit to the building, began to open. Slowly, creaking as though protesting the intrusion. I blinked, my heart hammering in my chest. There's no wind in here, I thought. No reason for that door to move. I flipped through the cameras, trying to check for any signs of movement, but the hallway remained eerily still. Am I imagining this? It was impossible to tell, but every part of my body screamed that something wasn't right. A chill swept over me, colder than any breeze from the air conditioning. I quickly stood up, grabbed my bag, and made my way to the door. My legs felt like they were moving of their own accord, as if some unseen force was pushing me toward the exit. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dark and silent, but the door, the one to the stairwell, was now wide open. A sense of foreboding consumed me. Don't look back, I thought, trying to steady my breath. I passed by the entryway and took a final glance toward the door before walking briskly toward the exit. I had reached the building's front door. Just as I reached for the handle, the lights flickered once more. A deafening silence followed, and the sensation of being watched washed over me again. I shook it off, stepped outside, and slammed the door behind me. I felt the relief of being outside, away from the oppressive weight of the building. The city light seemed far more comforting than the flickering of those cameras. But as I stood there, the feeling lingered, something was still watching me, still waiting for me to return. The next day, I woke to a familiar, unsettling message. It was from Larry. He simply said, "Did you lock up last night?" It wasn't until then that I realized I had never locked that door behind me. And now, the haunting presence of the building seemed to follow me wherever I went.